Hello and welcome to another episode of Over Under Movies, where we pick one overrated and one underrated film within the same style or tone or genre. And this is Oktay Ege Kozak.
I'm Eric McClanahan.
And I'm Ryan Oliver.
Yeah, and this episode we actually have some really interesting, exciting news for you guys. So I'm gonna let Eric McClanahan kind of take over from here because he knows the most about these new developments out of any of us. Way to
sell it.
Yeah,
way to sell it, man. It's very interesting and it's very exciting.
It's exciting. Man. Yeah, it's exciting. I'm kind of underselling it. I'm kind of doing like I'm kind of doing the Ben Carson thing here. I'm just like it's really exciting. It's
and you sound like you're falling asleep.
That's for you political junkies out there. That wasn't a movie reference, but yeah, Eric, take it away. It's hold on. Let me do that. We have an exciting new. I don't know why I can't do it organically. That's so weird. But anyway, this is really cool stuff. This is really interesting, exciting stuff. And Eric, why don't you explain to us what's going on?
Yeah, now I believe the excitement, Oktay.
There you go.
Well, yeah, just recently on my other film podcast that I do, Adjust Your Tracking, which is sort of a sister, cousin show, I like to think, to this show. That we've joined on that podcast. We've joined the Playlist, which is a movie blog on IndieWire. It's a part of IndieWire's blog network, and we've been posting. We posted our latest episode of Adjust Your Tracking on the Playlist iTunes feed, and it's going to live there now. And now I can say the same thing for this podcast, Over Under Movies. So we will have a new home, and we'll be posting these episodes first to the Playlist iTunes feed. And we will make sure to help make sure all of our subscribers and everybody that's been following us so far on the show, make sure that we will be there first and foremost if you want to get the podcast, but also that the show's pretty much going to stay the same. That's the same thing we said about AYT, and it applies here. So it's really just a chance for us to get some more attention on the show and kind of move up to the big leagues, as we said on AYT. So welcome to the big leagues, guys, and let's just make the most out of it and just keep doing what we're doing is what I say.
Yeah, hell yeah. Woo!
Yay. So that's the news. We're on the Playlist now. You will find us on that iTunes feed. This feed, the Over Under Movies one, will continue the iTunes feed, but you will get the episodes later, so note that. And then at some point it might just dissolve entirely. It might just
go into only the Playlist, but we'll have the links to everywhere on our Podomatic and Facebook and iTunes pages and everywhere to the Playlist feed, so that everyone can start following that gradually, and then down the line, we'll have episodes earlier on, first on the Playlist, and we'll move on from there. But otherwise, the show's gonna stay the same, and we're really excited about being part of the Playlist. That's for sure. And Ryan sounds really excited. By the way, I think he might have passed out.
No, I could not be more excited. I love doing this podcast with you guys, and I'm happy that we're on a great site, and I'm just really excited for this next step in our podcast.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, and like we said, nothing's going to change, so why don't we just get right into it then, huh?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. So, our picks for this week are they come from Ryan, and they're kind of in the R-rated, gritty comic book movie variety. I guess the idea was coming off the heels of Deadpool's success to dig into a couple of R-rated, bloody comic book adaptations. So his picks are Dredd for underrated, not the 1995 Sylvester Stallone Dredd, but the
no sir,
but the
no Rob Schneider here.
The 2012 gritty R-rated Dredd, and his overrated pick is the 2009 adaptation of Watchmen, maybe the most celebrated graphic novel of all time. So we're going to dig into that. Let's start off kind of with Watchmen. Ryan, why did you think Watchmen was overrated?
I think Watchmen is a very specific overrated, because if you look, it's got an okay critical reception. I think it's got like a high 50s Metacritic and like a 65% Rotten Tomatoes score. It made like 116 million domestically on a budget of 130 million. So I guess it wasn't totally a success, but it's sort of a personal overrated for me, because I don't subscribe to fanboy culture, because I think that is sort of destroying the nuance of film discussion, especially because we get so many comic book movies out and they're dominating the marketplace, and people like talking about them, and I'm glad that people are just talking about movies, but they get so bitterly angry or so overwhelmingly loving of a movie that it's like, where's the middle ground? And so, like, my counter argument to that is Watchmen, a movie that I am in the middle of, but its existence is almost overrated in and of itself to me, because it is the most celebrated graphic novel of all time, and it's certainly the best graphic novel that I've ever read. I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorite pieces of fiction, and I'm not saying it's should be regarded as some literary I guess classic like Moby Dick or something like that, but it's a great book, and it's a great story. And timeless, incredibly timeless. And so this movie version comes out in 2009, and I'm super pumped for it, as pumped as you can possibly be. And I don't think it's a bad movie, but I think there are two fatal flaws in this movie, despite the fact that there's a lot of good stuff in it. But I think there's two things at its center that make it wobble for me. And I think one of them, I felt this way the entire time since the movie came out. And it's also a strength of the movie, which is unfortunate. Visually, this movie is stunning. It looks like Dave Gibbons' art just leapt from the page onto the screen, which I think Zack Snyder took the same approach that he did with 300 and used the graphic novel as actual storyboards.
Right. Except here he built real sets was the real emphasis, as opposed to 300 was like that green screen,
Yes.
Yeah, it was on
digital.
the heels of like Sin City, where it's just like the entire backgrounds are like CG.
Right,
and
exactly.
there's a lot more like practical approach here.
Exactly, and that's also key. And that this movie's 7 years old, and like that seems like such a short time ago, but technology is moving so fast that some of these special effects driven films don't age as well, even in a short amount of time. This movie still holds up visually. I thought it was incredible looking, and because like 300 doesn't. I had to rewatch that movie when I reviewed the sequel, prequel, side quest, whatever 300 Rise of Empire was. It's kind of what that movie was, but that's neither here nor there. And that movie doesn't hold up, and Watchmen visually does. It's absolutely stunning, but I also feel that Snyder, he replicated the visual style so well and transcribed it so well. Like, he's a really good transcriber. He made it visually appealing and visually well done and stunning. But I feel like in staying so true to the source material, there wasn't any room to do anything else with it. And maybe that's all, if you're a fan of the book, maybe that's just all you wanted. But I guess I wanted somebody to take more creative liberties with it. I wanted, like Christopher Nolan does with like what he did with the Batman movies.
Like beyond the changing of the ending.
Right, which I actually am okay with the changing of the ending in the movie, and we can get to that. But like, Nolan will take elements of different Batman stories and tell his own story, his own spin on that. And like, Watchmen's a very dense book, and it's like this movie just kind of skims the surface of that. It gets the message across, and it does it visually well, but there's just something ultimately kind of hollow about it that's it left me feeling kind of conflicted about it, even though there's a lot to appreciate here. And the other fatal flaw, and I know I've talked a lot, and I'll just say this one more, and I'll pass it on to you guys, because I want to know what you think of the movie. But I do feel that this story about putting our heroes under a microscope, who watches the Watchmen, the sort of underarching, underlying theme of this story, who watches the people in charge. And keeping an eye on what these people are capable of, like what are they capable of in terms of like violence and how they approach that. I feel like the violence in this movie needed to be more raw. It needed to be more like gritty. It needed to be more upsetting. And I feel like the movies, it's too polished and too overly stylized.
It has that Zack Snyder cool. It's got
the
slow motion stunts and wire effects and
which are impressive, no doubt. But if you played all the sequences that were in slow motion at normal speed, I guarantee you'd shed like 10, 15 minutes.
It's possible.
And so, to me, even though there are good things, and I want to get into all that too, because they're very specific details, but I just think that this is not an unsuccessful adaptation of a great book, but an underwhelming one. And so I'll turn it to you guys. I'd like to know what you think.
So Eric, do you wanna shit on it first before my rebuttal?
Well, it's funny you
like we did with Natural Born Killers, I guess.
It's funny you bring both of those up. I was going to reference. I thought of our Natural Born Killers episode, which is actually number 39 of this podcast. I thought of that when I was watching Watchmen, except that here I had a much different experience rewatching this overrated movie that we chose because I kind of liked Watchmen my second viewing, and I still, even having enjoyed it more than I did the first time I saw it when it came out in 2009, I still agree with a lot of what Ryan said. And to maybe just fulfill that prophecy that Octay laid in front of me, I will just focus on the violence that Ryan got into. And that, to me, is one of the, still, even though I enjoyed this movie, and in some ways, I must admit, I kind of enjoy the pure R-rated comic book violence. Like, when it happens, it's sort of so over the top and grotesque that it's like I'm kind of impressed by it visually, but yet it's all wrong for this story. Like, the comic book is violent, so it's not that it's wrong in that sense. Like, it's a violent story. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' illustrations, they're bloody, they're violent. It is a hard R comic, no doubt. But the movie is trying to be slavishly devoted to the look of the comic book, right? And Ryan has pointed that out. Like, he transcribes. That's kind of what Zack Snyder does and sort of does well. But it in paying so much respect to the look of it, the chances where Snyder actually and his crew tried to actually adapt it to become a movie and to change it to become a movie, some of it's clever. Like, the way they do change the ending, there's a big element that's missing from the comic book that's really memorable, but the way they solve the issue to achieve the same ends is really clever, and that, to me, is good adaptation. What's not good adaptation is, we're making another comic book movie, so even though in the comic, the original source, where the fighting isn't that elaborate and you never got the sense that many people fought very, swiftly or like kung fu style. Well, Zack Snyder has to make it like to fit in a modern day comic book movie realm.
That's
so they have to fight like it's they have to fight like it's the Matrix. And it's like, I don't remember when I read maybe I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've read the book, The Watchmen, but I don't remember Rorschach being able to do like kung fu ninja kicks and stuff like that.
Not really. Whenever there's a fight scene, as far as I remember in the graphic novel, it's not, like that alleyway fight scene with Silk Spectre and the Night Owl. It was like 2 panels or something, and they just like basically just quickly beat up the robbers, and in here it's just like this super violent, like heads get spun around and
bones break out,
and it's just like uber violent. And
there's also some strange, like almost Batman and Robin level sound design to some of those fight sequences, like the slaps and the especially when the person breaks into the comedian's apartment at the very beginning of the movie. That fight scene is choreographed really clunky. Like, they're stood and just I don't know, they're moving like a G.I. Joe action figure. Like, their arms could only go one way or the other, and the slaps sound cartoonish. And I think at one point Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the comedian says "Whoa!" as he's does a knife, and I was like, what movie am I in? And it's just started too. It's just weird how that the dark gritty material is juxtaposed with some silly moments, and there's even sillier moments than that one. But yeah, Octay, I want to hear your take.
All right. Well, Eric kind of went into my what was going to be my rebuttal about how kind of extended and more over stylized the violence is in this movie than the compared to the graphic novel, and that's kind of like that's the Zack Snyder effect. You kind of, going into watching the movie, I kind of expected him to kind of embellish on those scenes. Some of them work. The one that I think really works well is the opening fight with the comedian, because of the fact that in the graphic novel it's as like violent and disturbing, and he gets a lot of those like panels really well. And one of the things that he does really well is that, like you said, Ryan, is like he's a really good copy paster in that sense. I wouldn't call him like he's a good adapter. Like he adapts like other intellectual property or like comic books really well. It kind of goes beyond adapting. It goes from like, okay, I'm going to use the panels as storyboards, and I'm going to get those like exact same, the lines and the story and the frames and everything is pretty much like verbatim. It's like you're watching like one of those motion comics. Like every once in a while, like they'll have these semi-animated motion comics where like the pieces kind of move around a little bit, and they did one for Watchmen as well. I think the Ultimate Cut giant box set or whatever comes with the motion comic on a Blu-ray.
I saw that at a video store, and I kind of chuckled when I saw that they released, they're like, Watchmen, the complete motion comic, and I just walked by. I was like, isn't that the movie?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like
pretty much. I mean, the Ultimate Cut also puts in the animated segments of the pirate comic in the graphic novel, so that pretty much like completes pretty much all of it. I mean, the motion comic, I guess, it's verbatim, so it sticks to the original ending and has a couple of like additional stuff. But in this case, I felt like when I went in to see Watchmen, I was really satisfied because, and I was kind of surprised too, because there's so much stuff in Watchmen that I feel like, oh, this is too brutal, or this is too like politically subversive, this is too violent, this is too like abstract, like they'll never do this. Like I reread it like a couple months before the movie came out, and just was reminded of like how amazing that whole segment on Mars is, where
it's good,
where like it's like going True Detective, time is a flat circle. It's basically one of those like he's on Mars, but he exists in the past and the future and the present, and he's just kind of like, it's like a mini adaptation of Slaughterhouse-5, which is, as you guys know, it's a movie that I love. It's my favorite book of all time. So it's just like, I love that aspect of it. I love that whole like time as a circle type stuff, and the way that but then reading it at the time right before the movie came out, I was like, there's no way they're gonna have any of this stuff. They're probably gonna have like Dr. Manhattan escape to Mars, and then they're gonna have the conversation with Silk Spectre, and then they're gonna have a couple of shots of his like origin story or something. But it's like, I was so kind of pleasantly surprised that even that stuff is like all kept in there as kind of visceral and kind of like intellectually stimulating and abstract that as it can get. Like, I just love all that stuff, and I just love that that whole going back to your first point, Ryan, about like there wasn't much innovation, there wasn't much creativity. First of all, when it comes to Zack Snyder, you don't want him to kind of write his own stuff. So I don't know if there was a time when I guess, as far as I can remember, I guess Terry Gilliam was on the line to direct it.
Yes.
Now then I would be like, then maybe if I watched that movie and it turned out to be like as direct of an adaptation as the Zack Snyder version is, then maybe I would be disappointed. I would be like, Terry Gilliam could have done so much more with this. But Zack Snyder, we know what happens when he writes stuff or when he adds his own input. You get something like Sucker Punch, which
is my number one worst movie of this decade. Yeah, like, I don't keep tabs, but it is like far and away the most unpleasant. So I don't mind that. It's almost like Zack Snyder, like the Alan Moore writing and the story. It's kind of like below your pay grade. Like, just kind of maybe just transfer this thing using your talent as a visual
filmmaker, as a visual, like a great visual carbon copy, like copy paster, and just like don't really like don't try to add too much stuff. And then the stuff that he adds visually, at least not maybe on the story side, the visual stuff that he adds, a lot of it is the stuff that you're kind of criticizing Ryan, is that, you know, yeah, he the action scenes, the fight scenes that only take place like maybe 2 or 3 panels in the graphic novel are just like way over the top and crazy, which I agree with Eric on that side, which is that, you know, without that stuff, it's already like making it such a direct adaptation of Watchmen. It already takes so much balls, especially for like $130 million movie, that it's like you have to compromise a little bit. So watching those scenes, I'm just like, yeah, I still love this movie. Yeah, you can have that. You know, like it's I'm totally fine with it, because it's like it could have gone in so many horrible, terrible directions with this adaptation. They could have like chopped out a bunch of stuff, and you know, they also added like watching like reading the book right before the movie came out, I was like, there's no way they're gonna have the scene with the therapist with Rorschach.
Right,
with the backstory,
his origin.
That stuff is like, that's like frame
So
by frame.
good.
That stuff is all in the movie. It's insane that they got away with that.
Octay, I think this viewpoint. Sorry, Ryan. Real quick, it's just interesting because, like, I think Octay's viewpoint, and that's the one I find to be the common thread in fans of the Watchmen movie, like from the beginning, the ones that really took to it, and the ones that did, I think, were raving about this film then, and they probably still do now. And that's the reason I think also that you could argue this might as an overrated pick, because you're that viewpoint is like you're sort of forgiving him, you're acknowledging flaws in the movie, which is totally fine. We all do that with things we like, but yet you're forgiving it because this is a sort of the fanboy culture that I think Ryan was touching on. It was like, you got, like, this is the movie that they wanted. They got this one.
Exactly.
And Snyder, in a way, an odd way, not even an odd way, Snyder was the right guy to make this version of Watchmen. To make the version,
exactly.
To make the one that would make the fanboys, a lot of the diehard comic book movie fans, but also fans of the Watchmen.
Paste.
Exactly, they would make it happy, but yet I loved the book, like Ryan too, yet I also still have problems with the movie, and it's because of the odd things that I guess he did have to make certain concessions, but then why did he maybe it was just a series of trade-offs to get this movie made. I mean, from what I remember, this was essentially the carte blanche that Zack Snyder got to make this, was because 300 was such a wildly beyond they could have ever imagined successful hit. So he got to do the version that like he wanted, which is like keep it to its roots. It's set in an alternate 1985, which I am glad that happened, that exists, that this version of Watchmen exists. However, it is a flawed movie, and I think there are even more things to bring up and in terms of flaws, but it's an interesting culture we're in fanboy culture. And Octay, I'm not trying to lump you in that. I just find your feelings are similar to what I remember from a lot of people who are positive on this movie.
Well, it's fascinating too that that fanboys sort of like latched onto this movie, and in terms of fanboy culture, Snyder has most recently made probably the most polarizing movie to these so-called fanboys with Man of Steel. Like, I don't know anybody like except myself and maybe all three of us who are like kind of middle ground on that movie. Like, I know people who either love that movie or they're like, it's the worst thing I've ever seen. In fact, I think I saw a tweet from, I think it was Scott Weinberg, who's like around that time. He's like, if Man of Steel, Iron Man 3, and Star Trek Into Darkness are the worst movies you saw this year, then you don't watch enough movies. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's like these movies are like, they're fine entertainment, but like, why? Like, there shouldn't be like a love-hate stigma for them. I mean, I guess you're allowed to feel what you want to feel, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And like,
you're allowed to feel what you want to feel, but at the same time, it's like, are you that passionate about it because you want to belong in this like kind of like fanboy discussion, or are you really that passionate about it? Do you really think it's like the worst movie ever made? Like,
right, exactly.
I doubt that.
Like Drew McWooney has this amazing article on HitFix he wrote recently about the Fantrum, about fans throwing a fit, and he did it with the 1989 Tim Burton Batman movie, and he talks about how he quit Ain't It Cool News. He's like, because there's more to movies than arguing about people in spandex, and and it's true. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I've come to accept, like, I enjoy comic books, and, like, comic book movies can be done very well, and they can be enjoyed as entertainment, but it's like, but let's not pretend there aren't other movies out there. Let's not let these be the only movies that we watch and discuss. And so I guess I don't quite know where I'm going with that, but
yeah,
like,
but and also maybe have a little bit of nuance. Maybe not have it be like, oh, it's the worst thing ever, or it's the best thing ever,
Exactly.
or even if you think like it's the best thing, like it got your fanboy like pre-qualifications like exactly right, and it had every single note like exactly right, and you get this like jolt out of it because you're a fanboy, because you know the material, and it's like right in front of you in motion with these amazing effects and sound and all that stuff, and then maybe coming out of it not be like, it's the greatest thing ever, and if you don't agree with me, you're a piece of shit. It's just like, maybe just be like, maybe that was the best movie for you as a fan of that material, but you have to also understand that like maybe people who are not as big of fans, or maybe people who are fans who are just like, yeah, I expected something different. Like there's a bit of like just like people kind of toning it down a little bit, and being like having a little bit of nuance in that respect.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, and there's a whole, maybe a subculture of people that saw this Watchmen movie and that hate it because it doesn't include, I mean, it's probably okay to say, right? That the
giant squid.
Yeah, there's no giant squid.
Yeah.
Remember the Hitler meme that goes around from Downfall that, everybody uses for whatever they're angry about that week? There was one for the Watchmen. Like, how dare you make a Watchmen movie without the giant squid? But I thought that was a funny meme, and I forgot about it like we do with all those things the next day. But it's like, actually, that's not why I had issues with Watchmen. That was the thing, the one part of adaptation from the screenwriters to the way it was executed, where they actually solved a problem, a story problem. Like, how are you going to get to this ending where this explosion goes off, yet it still is going to tie all the characters together in a way that'll actually make a sort of sense? I get why they would want to go away from the bizarreness of that giant squid.
Because Octay already kind of mentioned, like, we do have to commend this movie. Like, I mean, it's one of those, like, where's your expectation level? Because it's like, this is probably the best movie that Zack Snyder could have made. Like, no doubt about that. Someone else could have made a better movie, but the fact that it does do some of the stuff that it does. But even the giant squid is one thing that I think even more savvy people who hadn't read the book, who could be following what was going on, if that happened, they'd be like, what the fuck just happened?
It would also require that whole massive subplot that is completely eliminated in the movie version of the artist being kidnapped. There's that whole, and that's
the whole
good
setup to the giant squid
is
like, it's pretty much gone.
And it makes complete sense in the context of the movie what they changed it to. And you got to credit the screenwriters. One of them being David Hayter, actually the voice of Snake in the Metal Gear Solid games.
Really? That's such a weird connection.
It's a weird connection. But I guess I've said some negatives. There are good things about this. Like I said, I don't dislike this movie as a whole. I think most of the casting in this movie is pretty spot on. Because it got to be made on the scale that it did and got the budget that it did. He didn't have a lot of money to probably afford, Brad Pitt or somebody to be in this movie, nor would we really want him. But they couldn't hire a name actor, so like they had to go with some great character actors. I think especially Billy Crudup and Jackie Earle Haley are so good in this movie.
I would put Patrick Wilson, and who's the actor that plays the comedian, the guy from
Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Yes, Jeffrey Dean Morgan is great, and Patrick Wilson is. This is nitpicky. Patrick Wilson's great. I really like him as an actor. They needed to cut the line out because again, Zack Snyder transcribing. He kept a lot of lines in. I
know the one.
The one who's like, what does he say? I have it written down here. It's like a flabby failure that sits wallowing in his basement. And because in the book, he is Night Owl too.
Yeah, he's like a middle-aged, like kind of flabby guy.
Kind of gone to Pudge, retired. It's like Patrick Wilson's a pretty fit guy. Like he's, I don't care about looks because you should cast for the best performance.
But again, some of those. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all good. basically just saying he gives a good performance, but then it's like, then why did you keep a line that's pretty much makes no sense in the context of the movie, because you're dealing with somebody who's like a pretty fit.
I think that goes back to like some of the minimal compromises that they had to have in order to bring this like really dense, violent, like incredibly politically subversive and material that goes into like quantum physics at times and turns into like an incredibly violent kind of taxi driver vigilante story in the middle of it. And it's kind of like that whole stuff is all over the place, but like all of the elements are just like really risky especially like for a giant budget Hollywood movie like this. So I kind of understand like those compromises of of like the studio head saying like, okay, you get carte blanche because the 300 was a big hit, but we can't have like Paul Giamatti playing the Night
That would be
Owl.
fascinating.
That would have been awesome for me. Like I would have been fine with that. But just like all that stuff that I kind of criticized the movie for, it's just like maybe the cast is maybe a little bit too attractive for their counterparts. I guess like the attractiveness fits the both Silk Spectres, which I think Carla Gugino is really good in this as well.
Even though she's only 7 years older than Melina Ackerman is playing her mom.
That
and her
happens.
makeup is not doing her any favors, nor is the makeup doing
the
anybody
makeup in
favors.
this movie is not great, especially like aging makeup, like the makeup on Richard Nixon.
Yeah, I was about to say
embarrassing.
One of the reasons I kind of like I'm not the reason, like I don't prefer the theatrical version over the director's cut, but some of the cringe-inducing moments in the director's cut come from like the extended scenes with Nixon. Some of the makeup stuff, like even with the at the beginning with the old comedian, it's just it doesn't hold up really well. So there are those little like technical issues like that, but mostly
he apparently cast young, and I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but apparently he cast younger, even though they were going to be playing older people because of all the flashback. He's like, well, they're primarily in flashbacks.
And so he's in like, that case, that's understandable.
Yeah,
a lot of movies do that, but I just didn't think the makeup was like up to snuff there.
No, not
it was a little bit too cartoonish. But going back to our notes about like how more exaggerated the action scenes are, and some of them really work and some of them don't. The shootout in the hallway with the guy from the elevator is great because it's basically like panel by panel. So I'm perfectly fine with that. But that stuff, I don't think that stuff is like really Zack Snyder compromising, because we know that Zack Snyder loves the cool. He's like the more I guess restrained and more like Michael Bay with a higher IQ in that sense. Like he takes joy out of like these cool, violent, like the R-rated version of like that flashy Michael Bay action. He really digs that. He really gets into that. So I don't think those were compromises. I think those were the kind of stuff that he added that you were talking about, Ryan. I think that's what he did. Like visually, he added a lot of like kind of big budget Hollywood pizzazz to it, which I totally forgive it, because it has all the stuff from the graphic novel that I thought there was like no way in hell it was gonna make it in there. So yeah, that's why it's just like I forgive a lot of like its glaring faults.
Totally, and it's interesting you brought up Michael Bay, because I actually wrote here in my notes that like I don't want to be quick to call Zack Snyder a hack, because that just seems mean, because like as opposed to, you're right, he does have those like, he does like to fetishize the action sequences the way that Michael Bay does, but like unlike someone like Bay or Brett Ratner, like Zack Snyder does genuinely care about the stuff he's putting out. Like he genuinely I think he genuinely wants to make good movies, like as opposed to Bay and Ratner, who are just kind of like, whatever shit I put out there, people are going to go see it. And Snyder, I think Snyder wants to make good movies. He's a passionate guy. I like hearing interviews with him, but I don't know if he just has the ability to. Like it's the unfortunate tragedy of as a filmmaker.
And that's where it's like when you look at it, like Watchmen is probably his best film next to the Dawn of the Dead remake. I mean, however you
say. Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think the first 90 minutes of Man of Steel is the best movie he's done. It's very, very good. Like,
and that's interesting because he did divert from a lot of the source material. Like they used pieces, they went the more Nolan route for that one, and it was a very divisive movie.
And that movie has the same. If you boil it down to just screenplay plot beats, and since it was also written by David S. Goyer, it's the same plot structure as Batman Begins.
Right,
like, it's got the flashback structure, and it's got, you know, the only difference is in where people get hung up on that movie. Myself, to a degree, not as much. I've come around more to defending that movie, almost out of like.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to be included with those people who like hate the movie. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I don't want to be involved with that. But like,
well, that means that at least he's taking chances. You know, it might not work. It might be disastrous. But like, you know, look at the movie that he made right after Watchmen. It was like a PG-rated animated owl movie.
Right.
Right. Yeah, because it was the Owls of Ga'Hoole or something.
Yeah, Legend
like
of
that. Like,
Guardians.
It was fine. It was like a nice. It was like a Happy Feet Disney kind of clone of, you know, maybe a little bit darker kind of fairy tale mood to it. Like I forgot everything about it pretty much like day after I saw it, but it wasn't bad. Sucker Punch is terrible, and the Sucker Punch was the one where like I feel like after Watchmen came out and when people started complaining that like, yeah, he did it like, you know, he just adapted it panel by panel, but there's no like cinematic influence in it, and that he didn't add anything of his own, of a like a unique voice or a new material or stuff like that. And when people used to say that right after Watchmen came out, I'd be like, I guess you're right, but you know, I still enjoy it. And then after Sucker Punch came out and knowing that he like co-wrote the script for that one, post Sucker Punch, when people come up with that criticism about Watchmen, I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
No, that was a great thing that he didn't add anything to the story. That was great that he didn't fuck around with it.
And I would say the only thing he added was an element that I most appreciated this time out, and it's the way that I actually think the biggest influence on the way he made Watchmen the movie was a movie from a few years earlier, was Todd Haynes' Bob Dylan movie, I'm Not There, because both those movies use other cinematic references visually throughout the entire to tell their narrative essentially. So when in I'm Not There there's a different actor playing Bob Dylan, it takes the look of a certain movie, and then when it's the Cate Blanchett version of Bob Dylan, it's like a Fellini movie, like 8.5. It's referring to that kind of stuff. And then in this film, in Watchmen, I really came to appreciate how he, as much as I appreciate it, there still are some that don't feel as good, or maybe they're too on the nose. Like, for instance, there's the Apocalypse Now Ride of the Valkyries.
Yeah, I wrote that in my notes.
It's too on the nose. However, I get what he's going for. He wants to remind you of these movies. So Rorschach, his whole narrative does play like he's Travis Bickle in this world. And everything looks like that neon New York wasteland from the 70s. And then there are other elements where this movie, he makes the kind of goon gangsters, the sort of, just the run-of-the-mill gangsters that are on the street in the Watchmen world. Like, they look like they could be on the set of a Warriors sequel or something like that. Like, so like The Graduate, he references it with movies and music from these movies. Like, The Sounds of Silence. Like, there's a Graduate reference. There's Dr. Strangelove, like the War Room is mimicked. You know, I could go on and on. There's a Raging Bull reference.
Well, a lot of those come from the graphic novel as well.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
A lot of the song choices actually are referenced. I think every edition, like every whatever of the, it's like a 6 or 7.
All on the Watchtower.
Yeah, and then there's and then each each edition has not edition. I'm trying to think of the word here, but the whole graphic novel is comprised of like 6 different releases, right? Like 6 different smaller comic books, and each one of them ends with a quote from like most of it are Bob Dylan songs, so that's why there's a lot of Bob Dylan in the movie. And
you should say the opening credits in this movie.
The opening credits are great.
I think they're so good. Yeah,
it's incredible. It's just speaking of Bob Dylan, like that. It's one of the best opening credits to a movie that I've ever.
I gotta say, that's one of the moments where they created that for this movie. I mean, they are images and they're telling subplots from the graphic novel in that, but you don't know that. It's just the way it's montaged together and the way he created that with The Times Are A-Changin', the Bob Dylan song. Like, that was really quite another sort of surprisingly innovative decision.
Right, and it condensed all the backstory to
so much.
a brilliant, montage to an amazing song. Like
it was a sequence. It's like a cinematic sequence, and when he gets those moments in the movie, and I think he hits it with the Rorschach jail sequence, the whole thing where Rorschach's in jail, and also the Dr. Manhattan and Mars. Like he really did nail it. And it's these moments where the movie can like be so similar, it really is just in these moments a moving version of what we love about the comic book, but yet he does find a way to merge it and make it work, but yet there's still just as many sequences that don't work yet. But I just had to say, I really appreciated that. Sorry, I just had to appreciate that. I really appreciate the way he tried to apply the postmodern style of the original graphic novel, which was riffing on familiar characters and making their own, like Nightwing is a version of Batman and so on and so forth. It's like, I like that he tried to do it that way with his movie, not always successfully, but I appreciated that much more this time.
Yeah, that's the stuff that works in it works so well.
Yeah,
especially as a fan of the graphic novel. I mean, if you watch the movie not knowing anything about the graphic novel, maybe you'll be kind of like half and half on it, of like, this stuff was really interesting, this stuff was kind of boring, this stuff was like, just a little bit too over the top or whatever. But comparing it with the graphic novel, the stuff that they got from the graphic novel, that they did so well and it's so invigorating. The whole Mars section, the opening credits, the Rorschach backstory. Incidentally, a lot of the stuff that were in the stuff that really works in the book really works in the movie. It's just like my favorite stuff in the book are when the plot just comes to a halt, and then you find out like the backstory of one of the characters. And that stuff is like so much fun to me. And the stuff that they get so right. Works so well that I'm able to kind of completely ignore anything that doesn't really work 100% in it.
Yeah, totally. But I think there are some bigger issues, I guess, that prevents me from, like, there's a couple, one of which is just, I feel like even though like those sequences, like, Eric, you mentioned the Rorschach one, I think the Dr. Manhattan sequence, like the Mars one, but also him describing how he got to be the way he was. That whole sequence is really, really strong. But I feel like, because the novel's so dense, even though this movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes long, it still does feel a little rushed. Like, it feels like everything's a little condensed, and that maybe a mini series would have been the best approach for the story. And I definitely, I wholeheartedly believe that, because it's like some of the character interactions, don't hold as much weight, or they just, they're not as well developed, and so they come off as clunky. And I hate to be that dick, but I gotta say, any scene that Malene Ackerman is in just really, really drags the movie down for me. I'm sure she's a lovely person. I've never liked her as an actress, except for the Adult Swim show Children's Hospital. It's the only thing that I've been able to stand her, and she's not a dramatically sound actress. And some lines that she has in this movie, like, it's like licking your fingers is like a battery. Oh my God, I am on Mars. It's just like this. It's really bad line readings. I
don't mind her normally. She's definitely a little bit out of her element here. I can see where you're coming from. I think she's fine. She's definitely the weak link in the cast.
I can't do it. And we also have to mention the Hallelujahs, the scene set to
the worst.
I
think that's embarrassing in the graphic novel too, though.
It is, but it's really bad here, because it's like, if you talk about the things that are 2 panels long that he stretches out to the action sequences, which, are fine. You have to try and make this movie, palatable to a wide audience. I understand that, but this scene is not one of the ones that you drag out in slow motion.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, number one, even though he's the originator of the song, it's not even the best version, even though, like, use
no context there,
version if you're going to do that. And secondly, it's just other than the pool scene in Showgirls, this is the worst sex scene that I've seen. Like without a doubt. And it's just like,
the pool scene in Showgirls is incredibly entertaining.
Right, and this one's
because they look like they're in a gladiatorial fight or something. Like,
right, but this one in Watchmen, you just want to end.
Yes, I always skip it when I watch it on.
It's a wise decision because it's just like that's another one of those like again like Batman and Robin level like badness that
as far as embarrassing from the graphic novel, I was referring to like the gag about the fire shooting out of Night Owl's ship.
It's funny in the and it's funnier in the comic because it's condensed and you get the point. Whereas Zack Snyder extends that moment, like Ryan was saying, and it like, or we're all saying, and it's like it's ridiculous. It kills the joke. If there was the joke of even using Leonard Cohen Hallelujah is like killed because it goes on too long. Even if it times out at 20 seconds, which I think it's longer than that, but even if that's all it is, that feels like an eternity when you're watching them.
Totally. And the other thing too is like again squeezing nuance and making things look stylish. Like there are scenes in this movie because of the style. Like there are scenes that should be more harrowing and should be more upsetting than they appear. Like especially, and I do think it's a great sequence. It's right out of the book. But you know they go to the comedian's funeral and they do the flashback from Night Owl's perspective, from Dr. Manhattan's perspective. Right. They do the different ones, but it's like in those flashbacks he tries to rape Silk Spectre, and he shoots a pregnant woman in the head, and like it goes by so fast, and it's like in any other movie I'm like those are like we need to stop for a second. Like you need to let those sink in because those are horrible things that have just happened.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
And it just kind of glazes over.
But that's kind of the time restraint that they had as well.
That's what I mean. Like,
I agree with the miniseries idea. I agree that it does like kind of move on a little bit too fast. But at the same time, you guys all have to agree that especially in 2009, like a miniseries of that scope, like a 5-6 hour miniseries, was a non-starter. Like
exactly,
that wouldn't have happened. And maybe today, maybe like if Netflix just like plops down like a shitload of money to make like a 6-episode run of The Watchmen or something, maybe today in this like kind of streaming, like everything's out in the open,
with like Daredevil and stuff.
But even with those like Daredevil, Jessica Jones or whatever, like something on the scope of Watchmen would have to be like 5-10 times more expensive, I would guess.
Yeah, you might be right, but yeah, I get that. They had the time constraint. Also, fun fact, the reason the movie was cut from the director's cut was, they were actually fine releasing the cut, but it played on IMAX screens, and those IMAX platters are not very big, and they can't hold more than...
Oh, that was the reason?
Like 3... Yeah, so they cut it for that purpose alone.
Maybe that's why
that was the same thing with The Dark Knight Rises, I believe, is Nolan had a longer cut, but then when he realized he had like X amount of space to get it on the IMAX platter, he had to tighten it up.
He never released the director's cut of that.
I would love to see a director's cut.
He doesn't do that. No, it made him make the movie shorter than he originally thought it was.
Fascinating. Because the Watchmen thing, every single, maybe that's because of that like technical IMAX thing, that every single, as far as I know, home video release of Watchmen has been the director's cut. I don't know if you can even get the theatrical cut on any like Blu-ray or DVD anymore.
I used to own the Blu-ray because I bought it when it came out, and I was like, I wanted to like it so much, and I didn't end up, and I think I traded it in at some point, but I redeemed the digital copy for it, which is how I watched it in preparation for this episode, and the digital copy is the theatrical cut. So as Eric said, you could stream it like that one's available, but I think home video cut, you can only get the director's cut. I don't think you can get the theatrical cut.
Which I think adds some interesting stuff. I love the addition of the I don't like the Richard Nixon stuff, but the addition of the scene where the gang attacks the first Night Owl. Right. And there's these really clever cuts about like how he's kind of going back in time into his days.
That's the Raging Bull sequence. They use that,
exactly.
That music,
And it does help the movie breathe a little better. Yeah. Like I'm not going to say it's successful entirely, but it's the same thing with the like recent director's cut of Straight Outta Compton, which is 20 minutes longer. Like it doesn't really add much to the movie, but it does let those moments that really work, which are a lot in that movie, breathe, and it's a better movie. It's a better movie movie because of the director's cut, and I would say the same thing with Watchmen. Like,
and maybe one other idea at the time could have been to split it into two movies, like 2.5 hour movies, like Kill Bill. But I don't know how that would have worked out as well, because when the movie came out and it wasn't such a huge hit, maybe they would have buried the second part or something. I don't know. And especially if they did like, okay, why don't you shoot the first part and then we'll see, then it would have been even worse, because then you'll just be stuck with like half a movie.
Right.
So those are the risks that I'm sure like everybody kind of took from that. But yeah, the in an ideal world, I totally agree with you, Ryan, that, you know, would have worked better as a miniseries the way it is. But that just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I like you guys said, it's got its problems. It's probably to the best of Zack Snyder's ability. He's pseudo adapting my other favorite graphic novel that came around the same time, in The Dark Knight Returns, in Batman vs Superman, very loosely.
Right.
You know, I root for that movie. I hope all the best. I want to come out of it and say that it's awesome. I have my doubts, but you know.
But by the way, the Warner Brothers animated version of Dark Knight Returns is pretty fucking great.
I imagine so.
If you guys haven't seen that,
that graphic novel's great. So if they did anything remotely close to it,
it's fairly like, I wouldn't say panel by panel, but it's really close to the original.
I will definitely check it out. And also, the home video cut for Batman vs Superman will be 3 hours long.
Yay!
Half hour longer, and will be R-rated. So
more Lex Luthor with hair.
The R-rated. Hey, well, I mean, he does lose his hair eventually, or you know. So, but you know, I wish that movie all the best. You know, I'm rooting for it. But we'll see. Just, you know, based on my skepticism with Watchmen, and you know, there are good parts of Man of Steel until that last hour kicks in, and
I know one movie that was R-rated when it was released theatrically, and certainly didn't need the R-rated treatment when it was released, and it's our underrated pick. I feel like we're forgetting about Dredd.
We're digging into Watchmen and forgetting about Ryan's underrated pick, which is the 2012 adaptation of Judge Dredd, just simply called Dredd. And well, Ryan, why'd you pick this as your underrated?
I think this one speaks for itself. This movie.
All right, thank you for listening to Over Under.
That's great. No. This movie, you know, I don't like to always, you know, I really don't like to take box office account into consideration necessarily, but this movie was a huge bomb when it came out. Like, I think it made $16 million on a $50 million budget. So this movie was like almost a third the budget that Watchmen was. Which, don't get me wrong, Watchmen's visually stunning, but Dredd, for its budget, you know, completely, it looks great. It immerses. It's fully realized. It's a world that's fully realized.
Every single cent you can see on the screen that they spend.
Exactly. And I do think, you know, just one more quick on the box office. I do think, you know, the Judge Dredd comic is, you know, it's a really good comic, but I think, you know, because it's a more British comic and it's more a niche one, American audiences, just general movie-going audiences, I think some of them don't even know this is based off a comic book. Even though comic books are popular, I don't think they know that. And their biggest frame of reference for this character is the Stallone movie, which is terrible and is known as a terrible movie. Because that movie was I'm the law. Yeah, that movie was a huge flop when it came out, and so like people just remember that. But this movie is incredibly streamlined. It gets right to the point. It's 96 minutes long. There's no fat on this movie whatsoever. It gets right into it. And I think, you know, Octave said this like when we first, you know, started hanging out. Said it best. This was the real Robocop remake. This was more of a Robocop remake than the actual Robocop remake was, because it's hard R. It's very, like, I don't want to say tongue-in-cheek necessarily, but
satirical touches here and there.
It's very satirical, and that's where it's like, you know, where a movie like Deadpool, for example, which shockingly I enjoy, like, for the most part. Like, I had my issues with it, but it was a fun movie. But that movie is constantly winking at you and nudging you and like reminding you that this is like a comic book movie.
And this is more straightforward.
It's very straightforward. It incorporates its humor incredibly well. I also think I don't think it directly references. I mean, it doesn't directly reference Watchmen. I'm sure it's just a trope that they were mocking, but it kind of takes the piss out of Watchmen just a little bit if you think about it, because the big, like, one of the plot devices in this movie is a drug called called slow-mo. And so it's an excuse, right? And so it's an excuse to, you know, when the people take the drug, they're experiencing things at like 1/10 the normal speed that they normally would. And so it sets up some really incredible sequences. But it's also like, especially there's a shootout where all these people are high on this drug, and it shows, kind of glorifies the violence just a tad, just a tad. But so it's cutting back. Yeah, it's so good, and it's cutting back and forth to what we're actually seeing. But it's
and it gives the filmmakers a practical reason to use slow-mo, which I thought was brilliant.
It's like they work that in the story without, like, I mean, they call attention to it, but like winkingly, but not, you know, in the fourth wall breaking way. And I think that's
they get to have their cake and eat it too. They get to kind of lampoon that style by practically using a story device like that, where you take a drug and everything's in slow motion, but at the same time they get to like exploit how cool it looks as well.
Right, and to me, it's like you mentioned too. That's all cool. And you mentioned Watchmen being referential of other movies, and I think Dredd is the same exact way. I think that this movie, you know, it definitely has a John Carpenter influence. I'd say Assault on Precinct 13 and Escape from New York definitely being the huge influences. And when the score is not on complete bombast, like in some of the smaller moments, like it does have a very synthy, you know, Carpenter type score, and so there's definitely an influence there. Those slow-mo sequences, as we mentioned, the cinematography in this movie is from Anthony Mantle, Oscar winner for Slumdog Millionaire, who a movie we talked about on a previous episode. This movie is gorgeous. It's written by Alex Garland, which
I was thinking maybe that'll bring back some attention after the success of Ex Machina.
Exactly.
Right.
And this movie did really well on home video. Like, the people who discovered this movie and liked it really, really liked it. And so, like, I'm hoping that more people do discover it because of that. And apparently, the actual director of this movie is Pete Travis, who did that movie Vantage Point, which is not very good. No. But that's the only thing I think he did something else. But like, that's the one movie I remember of his that I saw. And apparently, you know, because Alex Garland was also a producer, I believe, and he was like very much the shepherd in getting this movie made. The actors would go to Garland for advice and not Pete Travis. Like, they would give him for direction.
Yeah, he was kind of like the showrunner on a TV show. Like, that's what I heard. That he was kind of like the you know, because he was a huge like Judge Dredd fan. He wrote like 3-4 separate screenplays, and I'm not talking about like drafts. I'm talking about like completely separate stories based on like other editions and other issues of like Judge Dredd. Issues. That was the word that I was fucking looking for when I was talking about Watchmen issues. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, he was like the expert on the. So it wasn't, I guess, as far as I know from my research, that he wasn't like the typical screenwriter on a studio film where just like they just buy the script and they're just like, all right, you know, just wait till the movie comes out, just go do your thing, kind of. You know, like, he was like really actively involved, which you can see because you can see a lot of like thematic and stylistic connections to like Ex Machina here as well.
Mm-hmm. Or even also, if you want to go 28 Days Later and Sunshine as well, like sort of kineticism of them. But anyway, go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that's where I think that's the best card that this movie has, like, in its deck, is like Alex Garland being the one that really, this was his vision from what he said in interviews and from what like what you can find online, is like this might even be a sort of scenario I've read or heard of, like Poltergeist is sometimes attributed to Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, like that kind of thing.
It was like this, you know, one or the other, they were both working on it, but Garland was really seen as the guy with the vision of this movie. And I think that shows because what he nails is what makes this movie feel so fresh. It's so simple and stripped down. And one of the best things about it is that it's not an origin story. It's just a chapter of Judge Dredd. It's like, it's just one adventure. I'm not as crazy as it is to hear you go.
It feels like it's like the third sequel to an already established series or something.
Right, and that's to its benefit because, like, we don't need to waste time. Like, even if we don't know who Dredd is, like, that's the impressive thing even more is that, this isn't as familiar a comic book character, especially to people in the States, but they didn't care. They just told the best movie is like, just throw it in there. You can figure it out, especially based on other movies you've seen, like Robocop, which is just very familiar in a very positive way. It reminds me of the original Robocop. And just, I like Garland's simplicity in that way. Like, he strips things down. He's very, like, utilitarian as a writer and, like, his themes, but that actually fits with Dredd as a character. Like, I really liked this time watching, beyond just enjoying this movie. It's a great ride. It's a great action movie. It's a great violent movie if you like those. But,
it's really violent.
Oh man, it was so violent. But you know what I really appreciated? Like, on a weird, like, I don't know, not weird, but like philosophical, I started thinking about Dredd as like an existential like character, and he's very utilitarian. Like, everything he would Dredd, I find him fascinating as a character, even though this movie doesn't give you a lot, but he's fascinating to me because of his utilitarianism. Like, he would never
like Rorschach.
Yeah, it's funny. Exactly. I wrote that in my
notes. He's Rorschach, and
if Rorschach got back, and spread the word of what happened at the end of the movie, and the world, like, this is almost just what the world
into chaos,
and this is that chaos, and like Rorschach, because like they even have the voiceover narration of like that's like the sort of morals that he's holding on to. You fucking hit it. That's what I wrote.
The whole thing about like Rorschach saying no compromise, you stick with the rules, and even when they're in deep shit. And the rookie is just like, what if we just like drop this criminal that we apprehended and just leave? And he's just like, nope.
And even if he thinks the rules are fucked, he's still like, these are the rules. I am the law. Like, that's basically... Yeah.
Even when he's betrayed by his own fellow, like, judges, like, he always sticks to his thing. He does have that, like, that thing that Rorschach represents, that sort of conservative, like, never give in sort of... They represent a similar, like political, social thing. But even more so with the utilitarianism I wanted to get into is the idea that, like, something like being a racist would never, to me, occur to this version of Dredd, or being a misogynist. For instance, he's given a young trainee played by Olivia Thirlby, because she's got this psychic ability. He's given her, right? Now, he isn't a fan of her at first, only because he thinks, like a lot of tough guy action heroes, that she'll slow him down. I don't need a partner, right? But
he doesn't mention like that you're a woman, you're going to be slow.
Exactly. It's because it's not about that, right? That's what I'm saying. Those concepts don't exist to a guy like Dredd, and that's what makes him actually a somewhat very simple but very deep and thematically interesting character to me, is that he those concepts don't exist to him. So once the Olivia Thirlby character proves himself, he's like, you're a badass and you're with me. Let's do this. Let's get, essentially I'm paraphrasing the movie, but that's how he goes about it. It's like, once you've come to help me out, or you've proven yourself, you're great. Doesn't matter if you're, a woman or anything. It's like, I like that Dredd as a character, especially in this movie. And I think this is a Garland thematic, something you can connect in all of his work, his novels, his scripts, everything is this idea
the comic book, as far as I remember, is a little bit more over the top.
Okay, and I'm not surprised.
He dials it down a little bit.
Right, and the characters are pretty, like, and you make mention that they do a great job of giving him some depth, like, with context clues, because, like, Judge Dredd's a cool character, like, kind of the way that the Punisher is a cool character, but he's kind of a flat character. Like, I mean, ultimately, he's got one... Well, maybe not as flat as the Punisher, but he's like I'm here to uphold the law, like that, and that's about as deep as the comic goes, and it just and it goes into over the top, which you can imagine, if you can imagine, because the movie has some pretty over the top sequences as well.
Right. Like it
doesn't get cartoonish. It doesn't.
No, it's still.
It doesn't indulge it in a self-referential Deadpool way. Like it's the violence is real. It has heft to it.
Right, exactly.
And yet, he does get to have that. That's where it goes back to, you guys are right. It's like, he does get the people making this movie got to have their cake and eat it too, because they glorify and really amp up and make look cool the violence. Like, when a guy gets tossed over the, like, 150th floor of a building in slow-mo as he's getting injected with this drug, and it's all his POV. Like, it's the kind of thing where, man, I really messed up by not seeing this movie in theaters in 3D, because I heard, and I can imagine, as anybody who watches it, that this must have been a great 3D movie.
Unfortunately, I did see it in the theater, but I didn't.
Okay.
Me too, I saw it in 2D.
A co-host on the Just Your Tracking saw it, and I think he saw it multiple times in 3D because he just knew. He's like, this will be gone so quick. I have to experience it again.
And I wish I would have. And it's funny, I was in Seattle when it was I didn't live in Seattle at the time, and I was downtown with some friends there, and it was playing at the Cinerama, and I was like, I should have gone. I so should have gone and seen that in Cinerama. That would have been incredible to see. But the where I went to college, we played it at the theater I was working at, but it wasn't. We didn't have 3D. We didn't have 3D, so it's like that was not an option. But I'm still glad I saw it in the biggest screen possible.
Well, mine was like one of those pleasant surprises that you go into a movie that you're pretty sure you're gonna hate. I just I went into it because I had to review it for one of the websites that I write for, BayHousePirate.com, and it was just like a September release, and I like pretty much any movie that you can think of. This is definitely the exception. That's like, you know that like intellectual property name, whatever they bought plus 3D. It's like Texas Chainsaw 3D, blah blah 3D, and this was just like Dredd 3D, and it's a September release, and it totally looks like that kind of mid-budget, shitty Luc Besson type like safe action crap. And I just went into it. I was just like, fuck, I have to review this or whatever. Maybe it'll be like fun in a like surface level way. And I was just like totally blown away. And then later on, when I found out that especially the slow-mo sequences where people take the drug, like apparently like the 3D on that is like amazing.
And they shoot it at like 1,000 frames a second or something.
And then here's a little interesting bit of trivia that like that ethereal music that you hear whenever it cuts to slow, like people experiencing the drug. It's like the Justin Bieber song "Baby," like slowed down like 100 times or something like that.
That's awesome.
Did you guys know about that? That's
incredible.
Someone on the internet did that like kind of an experiment, and it became like a viral hit because it sounds so bizarre. And then the people who made Dredd, I guess, during post, they just like put that in there. It's so weird.
That's rad.
No, I'm with you. Like, I saw it with a friend who, like, I love action movies, but I went with a friend who's like a huge action movie junkie, and we're sitting there, and I was like, I was impressed by the opening car chase. I was like, oh, this is well done, but I don't know how I feel. And then, then that shootout ends, and then it's like bodies are being cleaned up by this like giant Zamboni, and it's like the food court will reopen in 30 minutes. And I was like, okay, I'm in. You got me. Like,
I love those little Verhoeven style like satirical touches. But he doesn't overdo it. Like that's what I love about it. It's just peppered around here and there. And isn't there like there's like a homeless guy who just like will debase himself for money or something that's like written on his little card, and then the way that guy dies there's like a
it doesn't end well sketch. For that guy.
Yeah, that was fucking funny.
But then and also like the line is actually spoken. Dredd does say at one point, "You have 20 seconds to comply," just straight from Ed 209 from Robocop.
Yes,
so it's just like it's very obvious that the influence is there. Even the fact that Judge Dredd never takes his helmet off, and yes, Sylvester Stallone, he never takes his helmet off. I don't want to sound like a fan person, but that's he doesn't take his helmet off, and he doesn't in this movie. But he looks kind of like RoboCop. Like, he's got that square jaw, his face is covered completely, and it's a very referential movie, but it's a fucking blast. And compared to Watchmen, Watchmen being 161 minutes, this movie is 90 minutes long. And it just goes by, and it's just an awesome action movie that I think people were ready to write off, and I know because I was too, and Octave said he was too, and we're just so surprised by it, and so that's basically where I come from in the movie is just find this movie if you can.
Definitely, because even though we can't see it in 3D, at least anymore, as far as I know, maybe there are 3D Blu-rays.
The Blu-ray
God, that'd be worth trying, man. I would want to see that.
The Blu-ray that I have is it has both versions on it. Like, and it's probably the cheapest 3D Blu-ray you can buy.
Because it has it on the same disc as the 3D and the 2D version, so it's like it's like the only version that you can buy, as far as I know, for like the regular price. So it doesn't have that extra $10 or whatever that usually the extra special 3D Blu-ray releases have.
Right, it was $9.99 at Best Buy when I picked it up.
Yeah, so it's definitely like I love that mix of satire and straight hardcore action. I love that like Garland has this like really kind of delicate way that he approaches story development and character arcs. That the story is like basically like a straightforward. You could look at it as like, oh, they just go in, they kill like 100 bad guys, they go out, and there's no like real story development or character arc. But it's like there's just enough character art and character development to just get you going through this like very straightforward action film. It's like, it's not like you never expect Dredd to change into a completely different character by the end of the story, but at least there's this, I appreciate the touch of, he kind of starts off the story with like, hearing the girl saying, I want to make a difference. I want to make a real difference. And he's kind of like so hardened at that point. He's just like, yeah, right, you're going to die before you even like do anything. He kind of has that attitude. And then like gradually it just kind of turns into like, yeah, maybe like even in this shitty situation, maybe you can make a little bit of a difference. And he only has like peppers in a couple of lines here and there to get that point across. And, I really like that. Like I at least appreciate the attempt at building some kind of character and story in an action movie that's as straightforward or as like video game like as this. And that's part of the reason like like I sometimes tell you guys, it's like I love it when you do my job for me, because like this was like on my list of underrated films as well. Nice. And I was actually going to pair it with The Raid as overrated, because both films came out the same year. They have the same kind of like exact same structure of like cops going like floor by floor in this like high rise or whatever, and getting to like, it's like a video game setup basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think the main reason why Dredd works is because of those attempts at character development, and the main reason why I think The Raid works really well as like a martial arts demo, but it doesn't work for me as a movie, standalone film.
And that's understandable, because the character stuff is really good in this movie, and I think we should highlight that, because I think that even though the movie is pretty much balls to the wall action from the beginning to end, there's some really good stuff. As you said, I really like Olivia Thirlby as an actress. Like I really, Snow Angels was the first thing that I saw her in, and I was,
nice.
It's a bummer of a movie, but it's still a really good movie, and she's really good in it. And it's nice to see that she has this arc. She wants to make a difference, but then ultimately realize this may not be the way to use her powers and make a difference, because she has trouble having to pull the trigger on people. She's like, even though these people are terrible and I have the right to make a judgment call, I don't want to make that decision. I don't want to have to do that.
And it becomes more complicated once she finds out that this woman who helped them was her husband was the guy that she had to execute. So, right. But it doesn't dwell on that stuff. It's a very straightforward, like just bang 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 action movie. One big set piece after another. But there's just like those little moments that are at least attempts at like giving the story and giving the characters like a little bit of depth without like overstaying its welcome. Like it's one of the most fast-paced like action movies of the last couple of years. You can't even you start watching it, and from frame like the first second to the last, it's just like you don't know where it's it just like passes by you. It's really like
it's really tightly constructed. Yeah, it's like that, and the simplicity of it, and how well done the characters are, even in a simplistic way, as we've pointed out. Like it's impressive, and these are becoming my favorite kind of modern day action movies. And Octay, I know you said The Raid you find overrated. I adored that movie. It was in my top 10 that year, and I think that's another great example of simple can be better, simple, leaner, better. I mean, just look at the sequel to Raid. I mean, it's a much more bloated, bigger, grand.
I like The Raid 2 better than the first one.
Oh,
me
man.
too.
See,
at least they attempted the story there.
That's true.
But it's like it's an advancement, and I'm sorry, I don't want to shout over you necessarily, but Octay mentioned it's a video game. It's an advancement of merging the two, like video games and cinema, as these two forms are. Like if The Raid is the sort of like side scroller, you got to get from one level to the other in each level in the building. The Raid 2 is essentially Grand Theft Auto. Like it's a sandbox gameplay, open world. People are using pots and pans and baseball bats and other things to beat the shit out of each other in like really gruesome ways. And So, like, I don't know. I feel like that was the next evolutionary step for that movie, which might be a discussion for a completely different day.
Sure.
But Dredd is, I mean, Dredd's that same way. Like, it's level to level.
And another movie that comes to mind that also features several like character actor types from HBO series like Dredd is John Wick from a couple years ago. Like these simpler, more stripped down movies that John Wick barely gives you character development, but it gives you just enough with just the right amount of like in-joke kind of winking without it being right there on the screen that like this dude's dog is killed and he's going to kill the people that did it. Like that's great. And because John Wick when it's great, the stuff that it focuses on is really well done, i.e. the action. That's why that movie works, and that's
Do you remember the first thing I said when we came out of that screening, Eric? I said that was a better Max Payne movie than the actual Max Payne movie. Like that's
Dredd is a better Robocop remake than Robocop. So there
exactly.
You go. That's a good jumping off point because I would say to our listeners that if you loved John Wick and if you're a comic book fan, and I would be like that's a perfect recipe to check out Dredd.
Exactly. Like, and don't get me wrong, especially like we've talked about Deadpool, being such a huge hit, and that was kind of the inspiration for these choices. A movie that I was sort of like begrudgingly going to see, like the herd, like with with everybody else to go see it, and was surprised by it. But ultimately, it's like, but don't, if you want something that's just as hard R baddie, like hard R crazy, but takes itself a little bit more seriously,
without
but not
all the wink wink.
Without the wink wink, but without being completely serious, then Dredd's your movie. Like it's absolutely your movie. And too bad this movie didn't come out after Deadpool, because then maybe people would have gone and seen it.
They would have had a bigger budget probably, but then my fear is that they would have wanted it to be like goofier, maybe.
Maybe that's what I fear is the hey, let's make everything tongue in cheek. No, some things can be tongue in cheek,
and also Carl Urban for MVP.
For mentioning, he's kind of accidentally fallen into being like a really good like geek culture actor, because he's great as Bones in the 2 Abrams Star Trek movies. Like he's an excellent successor to that role, and he's go ahead, you say what you're going to say, because I agree with you completely. He's great.
Eric, what were you going to say?
Oh no, I thought it was you, man.
Okay.
We got the wires crossed. But I was gonna say like he's great, and I love that apparently he was the one who insisted that he should never take his helmet off, just like in the comic.
Right.
Because that was a big point of people were like mad, like Judge Dredd fans were mad because, of course, you hire Sylvester Stallone and he's gonna have to show his face, and that was one of the 5 million things wrong with that movie.
I was about to say that was such a minuscule problem compared to everything
at the
else.
bottom of like the glaring issues the 1995 Judge Dredd has. But he does a great job of like taking like the Dirty Harry archetype, which was the inspiration for the character in the first place, but like turning it into this like making it just even more gravelly than Clint Eastwood, which I didn't know that was even humanly possible. But he does a great job, man.
He does great. And I also have to give a shout out to Lena Headey. Cersei Lannister is, she's a great villain. Like she should just be playing villains, because she's pretty incredible. Great. She's really great. And also an early Domhnall Gleeson is in this movie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Domhnall Gleeson and Alex Garland must be buddies or something. They like working. He likes Domhnall Gleeson in his movies.
And it's funny, I kind of didn't notice that was him, and like I knew subconsciously, but I kind of forgot. And I was watching it at work, and my supervisor came in. He's like, "Oh, that guy's in this movie." I was like, which guy? He's like, "Oh, that guy from The Revenant," and I don't remember what other movie he said. I was like, "Oh shit, that is Domhnall Gleeson." Like I had no idea.
He looks pretty weird for sure.
He looks younger and skinnier, and like he looks, and of course the weird kind of electronic eyes or whatever, like the kind of like cyborg look that he has. It's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting character as well.
It is. He's also listening to the theme song from this British sketch comedy show, Snuffbox. Yeah, exactly. I thought that was like, wait, what?
And if you want to see a really fucked up weird show, watch
Snuffbox. Yes, Matt Berry and Rick Fulcher. It's great. Yeah, it's fantastic.
But Alex Garland going deep with those references and is
super deep. There you go, dude. But yeah, do you guys want to kind of cut it off there? I think we made some.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Like, even though Dredd's the movie that I absolutely want everybody to come away from this podcast to see, I knew Watchmen was like, we had a little bit more to discuss there. There's a lot to chew on. We're all fans of that book, but Dredd's a movie that's like, you've probably all seen Watchmen if you're listening to this, but if you haven't seen Dredd, you should see Dredd.
Watchmen is also not as big of a hit as well, so maybe like saying that it has problems, but like I feel like it's worth it, at least if it's a worth watch. If you check out the graphic novel first. I mean, for me it was it's interesting because both Watchmen and Dredd were on my underrated list for future episodes. And I was gonna pair Watchmen with 300 as overrated, actually.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, so that movie is that. I loved it when it came out, but that movie does not hold up.
It doesn't hold up at all. Like a year after it came out, even.
Yeah.
Pretty much like a couple months after I watched it in the theater, and it was just like, and then when I put it on DVD and watched it by myself, and it was just like, this is not very good. But but anyway, so that's pretty cool that I was kind of like a little bit conflicted going into this, because I was just like, yes, Ryan picked Dredd, it was on my underrated, but Watchmen was also on my underrated, but I feel like we made some good points in coming together and like understanding the faults of the movie, while kind of like saying, it like mostly works, and it's at least like a testament to like taking chances with such a huge budget like Hollywood property.
Yeah, so, I was glad to watch that a second time. So I would say anybody that maybe had a similar experience of not liking it or just forgetting about it the one time, it might be worth a revisit, especially if you like these kind of movies. Yeah, I would even say Watchmen is definitely go the director's cut for sure. Rent that.
I would definitely say so, especially in this climate of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and DC Cinematic Universe, superheroes anywhere. You want to see something different and a different take on these types of characters that's a little bit more like politically conscious and a little bit more existential. Like it's
pretty great to watch right now with our political climate.
Yeah, I was about to say it was almost too eerie watching it right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what's there's a timelessness, and I think I had mentioned that at the beginning. There's a timelessness to that book, so I guess therefore, because it's a transcription of the book, there's going to be a timeliness to the movie too. So like it's got that going for it.
That's a great button, man. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to this episode of Over Under Movies, and hopefully a lot of you are listening through the playlist, and we're really excited to be part of that on this episode. And signing off. This is Oktay Kozak. I'm a film critic for The Playlist, The Oregon Herald, DVD Talk, and BeaSparta.com.
And I'm Eric McClanahan, signing off. I'm film critic for The Playlist, and my film podcast is Adjust Your Tracking. I also write for Oregon Arts Watch.
And signing off is Ryan Oliver. I also do another podcast that's genre-oriented called Unspooled Reel.
Yeah, and you can find us now on The Playlist, but apart from that, you can follow us on Twitter on at OverUnderMovies. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/overundermovies, and if you search for over/undermovies on iTunes, you can subscribe to us there as well. Thank you very much for listening, and the next episode is they're gonna be my picks. We haven't really I haven't nailed them down yet, but yeah, we'll definitely get back to you on that. And until the next episode, thank you so much for listening, and stay cool. Bye.
Bye.